The movie begins with the story of Matilda Dixon, a young woman who lived in a town called Darkness Falls over 150 years ago. She was well liked by the children and was known to offer a gold coin to any child who lost a tooth, earning her the nickname Tooth Fairy. However, Matilda was struck by misfortune one day when a fire outbreak left her brutally burned. This led to her only coming out at night, with a porcelain mask protecting her face, as her skin was now highly photosensitive. One day, Matilda was wrongfully accused by the townspeople of being responsible for the disappearance of 2 children. In a bit of rage, they hung her to death, but not before an angered Matilda laid a curse on the town. Since then, it has become a widespread belief that Matilda's ghost continually haunts the children of the town to fulfill her diabolical curse. Eventually, the scene cuts to present-day Darkness Falls and focuses on Kyle, a young boy who had just lost his baby tooth earlier that day. At nighttime, he is about to head to bed when Caitlin, a friend of his, sneaks in through his window. She invites him to go out for a swim, but he refuses the offer, stating that he couldn't afford to as he needs to wake up early the next day. Before she leaves, he asks her to go to a dance with him, and Caitlin immediately agrees as the two share a kiss. When she leaves, he finally heads to bed, but is soon startled by some strange groans, which wake him up. Upon pulling his blanket down, he sees a scary figure with a porcelain mask just a few centimeters away from his face. He lets out a scream, prompting his mother to check on him. However, she immediately gets murdered by the creature while Kyle cowers behind some shower curtains in fear. The next day, the police come to the scene, and the movie cuts to 12 years later. A grown Caitlin is in the hospital with her younger brother, Michael, who has had trouble sleeping as a result of night terrors. When the doctors prove to be of no help, she picks up a phone and calls Kyle, who she hasn't spoken to in years. She tells him about Michael's condition, stating that she heard he faced something similar a while back. Caitlin asks him for tips on how he got over his trauma, but he tells her he never did, as he immediately turns to a wall full of pictures of the porcelain masked creature. Later on, Kyle visits Michael in the hospital, and the two have a short but interesting chat. However, their conversation is cut short when Caitlin, unaware of Kyle's presence, walks into the room. She is startled but excited to see him, and the two step out to talk. The duo engages in some serious discussion as Kyle asks if Michael has lost a tooth recently, thus insinuating that he suspects the Tooth Fairy is responsible for his chaotic insomnia. A puzzled Caitlin answers that he did lose a tooth, but chuckles in disbelief that Kyle's insinuating that the Tooth Fairy is real. The duo then runs into Larry, Caitlin's boyfriend, and the three have an awkward interaction. Kyle apologizes to Caitlin and states he can't help her, and she makes her way back to Michael in disappointment. Meanwhile, Kyle and Larry go to a bar to enjoy a drink, but Kyle soon leaves when a random guy named Ray tries to pick a fight with him. However, a relentless Ray follows and attacks Kyle again outside, ultimately resulting in both men falling down a steep slope. On recovering, the two engage in a struggle as Kyle sees flashes of the porcelain-faced creature in the woods. A frightened Kyle manages to overpower Ray and runs away while the latter is attacked shortly after by the creature. After the men go missing for a while, a search party is organized in the woods, and they end up finding Ray's lifeless body there. Following this, a group of police officers look for Kyle to arrest him on the grounds of murder. They find him in the hospital with Caitlin and pull him to the station for questioning. There, a detective bombards him with questions accusing him of Ray's death. Kyle denies having any involvement and answers the detective's questions, but soon keeps mute after requesting for his lawyer. Subsequently, he is put in a cell and locked in for the night. Back at the hospital, Caitlin is informed by the doctors that Michael has suffered a psychotic break. The head doctor suggests they try a sensory deprivation chamber procedure, which involves placing Michael in a dark space for a while to prove to him that there is nothing to be afraid of. Caitlin is skeptical about this procedure at first, but reluctantly agrees to it in the absence of a better alternative. The next day, Larry bails Kyle from his cell, and the latter immediately heads over to the hardware store to buy a ton of flashlights, as the police had confiscated his bag, which held all his lamps. After that, the two get into a car as Larry drives Kyle out of town. During their drive, Kyle learns of the deprivation chamber procedure that is to be done on Michael. A sympathetic Kyle asks Larry to turn the car around and head to the hospital, but Larry refuses. They get into an argument, which leads to an accident as they crash into a tree. Just then, the porcelain-faced creature emerges from the tree and snatches Larry away from his car, ultimately killing him as Kyle looks on helplessly. Eventually, Kyle gets back into the car and drives to the hospital. He barely makes it in time, but manages to stop the procedure just before Mike fully enters the chamber. However, he is soon arrested again. On getting to the station, he's quickly locked back in a cell. There, he tells one of the officers, named Matt, about the Tooth Fairy, but Matt expectedly dismisses him. Soon after, a town-wide blackout occurs. Kyle warns the officers to stay in the light to avoid the Tooth Fairy, but they do not heed his warnings, and most of them get swiftly murdered by her. During the attack, Kyle manages to steal the cell keys from a dead officer and frees himself. He makes it into his bag of flashlights, switches a couple on, and uses it to dispel her just as she's about to kill Matt. Soon after, Kyle predicts that she's headed to the hospital and quickly makes his way there. Soon enough, the Tooth Fairy arrives at the hospital, and Caitlin, as well as Michael, gets attacked by her. However, they're luckily saved by Kyle, who protects them with a night flare as they make their way into an elevator. But the persistent Tooth Fairy doesn't relent. She manages to stop the elevator before the lift free falls to the ground. They are then joined by a group of nurses and a doctor as they all try to make their way out of the hospital before the emergency lights go off. Sadly, all the nurses are picked up and killed one after the other, but the rest of the group is saved when Matt breaks in with his car, thus rescuing them. They all enter the car and head to a nearby lighthouse with a gasoline-powered backup system. Eventually, they get to the lighthouse and immediately try switching on the light but cannot. As a fuel line blockage stops it, Kyle and Matt go down to repair it, but the Tooth Fairy ambushes them and Matt ends up dead. However, Kyle luckily gets the line fixed before she can kill him. Soon after, the creature chases after them, but with Michael's help, they manage to switch on the lighthouse's beacon in the nick of time, thus inflicting severe damage on the Tooth Fairy who flees. However, when Kyle lowers his guard, she attacks him from behind, lifting him far above the ground. The two struggle in the air, but Kyle eventually removes her porcelain mask, revealing her disfigured face. However, the fairy quickly gets the upper hand and aggressively chokes him. In a desperate attempt, Kyle sets his sleeve on fire and uses it to smack her directly on her bare face. The photosensitive Tooth Fairy is vulnerable to this attack and ends up dying as the flame engulfs her. Then, the scene cuts to a young boy who just lost his last tooth. He is tucked into bed by his father, who warns him about the Tooth Fairy. When his dad leaves, the boy hears strange noises and uncovers his blanket to see the source of the sound. Fortunately, he finds it to be none other than his mother, who merely keeps a gold coin under his blanket, thus signifying that the Tooth Fairy and her curse are no more. That's going to wrap up this recap. We hope you have enjoyed it. If so, please please click the subscribe button with notifications turned on so you don't miss a single video.